And then the way he drove into that property that night, making it very clear that he was going to kill us. My mom ran to the safe to get her gun.
For years, Charlize Theron shouldered the weight of a shaky childhood alone. But the reality behind the scenes is even more disturbing than anyone feared. Charlize, Hollywood's atomic blonde, had always caught the eye every time she was on set, but behind the cameras, she was different. Suffering in silence for the longest until she decided to let it all out. What really happened to her as a child? How involved were her parents in her trauma? Join us as we discuss Charlize's truth about her parents. A traumatic childhood. Charlize grew up on a farm in South Africa before moving back to Europe at 16 to pursue a career in modeling, and then to the United States at 18 to pursue a career in Hollywood, where she thrived. Over the years, many have speculated about the atomic blonde, claiming that her childhood was probably sunshine, rainbows, milking cattle, and horseback riding. What's the worst that can really happen on a farm? Or at least so everyone thought. However, behind that quiet, grounded image, things were much more complicated. Growing up on a farm has often been paralleled with a sense of peace of mind, especially when the child grows up with both parents in the house. Less trauma, double parenting, a working husband, and a homemaker mother. From the outside looking in, she lived the perfect life, but on closer inspection, she struggled with the whims of a man who cannot seem to get out of the bottle. Her father, Charlize Theron. In Charlize's account, she detailed him as a dinosaur with an itchy finger. He loved his guns and beers and never stayed at home, as he seemed to largely prefer the company of his brother over his wife's and daughters. From a young age, she could tell that she would remain hindered as long as she lived under his roof. However, she kept her cool, walking on eggshells around him and protecting her mother, both of whom were victims of her father's verbal abuse. According to her, he was no saint, but he never physically abused her. But even though he didn't put his hands on her, he was sure to make life as miserable as possible. The little insults, the mild invectives, and the uncomfortably silent car rides. As her father struggled with alcohol and teetered on the edge of physical assault, she grew older, with her mother protecting her from the worst her father could offer. But could her mother really protect her forever? Will she ever find a way out of this impending disaster? Although Charlize was growing in the middle of that chaos, it was not enough to smash her dream. She wanted a life in the spotlight, a life far away from the violence, the pain, and, more importantly, her father. But will she ever find her feet in Hollywood with a past like that? Years passed, and the situation remained the same. But just how long was that going to last? The storm gets stronger. As Charlize grew up on the farm, counting her days and waiting patiently for that big break that would get her out of South Africa to fulfill her dreams, the tension at home grew stronger. While it almost seemed like her dream might never happen, growing older and taking the brunt of her father's alcoholism and aggression, everything changed when she turned 15. According to Charlize, her father had left the house again. She claimed that he had two favorite spots. He was either at home or at his brother's house, drinking to the point of stupor and coming back home with a raging fit and enough verbal abuse to throw around. But that night, something else was lurking. Something really dark. Charlize felt it inside, but certainty eluded her. However, she had been in a house that always felt like a trap to her, and she had dealt with the same man for 15 years of her life. So while she might not have been certain, she believed her intuition was good enough to sense the danger that came with that particular night. According to her account, her room's window faced the driveway, so she could hear him every time he came home. And what she heard that night near confirmed her intuitive guess. Doom was indeed lurking. The way that he drove into that property that night, I can't explain it to you. I just knew something bad was going to happen, she reminisced. Her father, at that time, had never crossed the physical threshold with her. It was mostly the verbal assaults, and she had learned to take that in her stride over time, and so did her mother. But when push does come to shove, will the oppressed finally push back? Charles came home flexing his usual invectives, which often came with the drinking motif. He was out the door, but armed with more than the usual verbal assaults alone. This time, he came with a gun. Inside the house, Charlize's and her mother's hearts fell flat. The inevitable was finally happening right in front of their eyes, and they did not have the power or the guts to stop it. Suddenly, a house filled with steel doors, once built as a haven for the family, had become a death trap, and its patriarch was its hunter. At first, the man shot through the steel door. To Charlize, that was not a warning shot. It was a declaration of a type of war that only ended in one of two ways. He killed them, or they killed him. Reasoning with him was out of the question at the moment, and for the very first time, her mother made a decision that left her in shock. She was ready to stand her ground and defend her home with a gun from her safe. Charlize had always felt like her mother was in her corner, and they made a pretty great team, meaning that they both had a say in big decisions. But how does anyone tell their 15-year-old they were about to kill her father? But her mind was made up, which made the next event a bigger problem. A choice no child should witness. Caught between a rock and a hard place, Charlize's mother had to make a choice, and in the heat of the moment, it wasn't necessarily up for debate. Her husband, accompanied by his brother, was shooting through the steel doors, and when he couldn't penetrate, he reassured her of his resilience to get into the house regardless. As the moment intensified, her mother grabbed a gun, preparing for the worst. According to Charlize, when her father moved away from the door and headed to the safe to pull out a shotgun, her mother fired a shot in the hallway, which ricocheted 7 times off the wall and into his brother's hand before tracking Charles to his safe and shooting him dead on the spot. The situation had escalated, and a person had died. But he was more than her oppressor. He was also the man who cornered her in a house and tried to kill her. But more importantly, he was still her father. Her mother had killed her father, and she wasn't sure exactly what to feel, as she had also just saved her life. But at what cost? Her oppressor was gone, but so was every shred of any chance of a normal childhood for her. In her heart, which was blinded with anger, fear, and rage, all she could see at first was blame. But shockingly, the blame she carried in her heart was directed toward her mother at first. It was basic, but it was understandable. She had just killed her father, and Charlize was only 15 years old. The world might be dog-eat-dog, where only the strong survive, but to a 15-year-old teenager who was dreaming of becoming a big star, it was not a concept she specifically understood. Charlize claimed that the weight of her mother's decisions rested heavily on her heart. Is it possible that her age was a deterrent to her mind at the time, stopping her from seeing the clear picture? She was in shock and could not process everything that had just happened immediately, even though it happened right in front of her. So she leaned towards the one space where she used to find peace, her mother's. But she still wasn't sure if she could forgive the woman who killed her father, even though he was actively trying to kill her. But did she ever snap out of this feeling? According to her account, her long-standing anger towards her mother felt valid, and she was still deciding if her mother saved her life or just took a life. Although the dust had settled at home, it was a crime scene. The law now decides whether she ever sees her mother again. With the possibility of losing more than one parent on the cards, what's next for Charlize? The aftermath. The deed was done, but consequences remained. A simple family who lived on a farm had just lost the man of the house, and it was his wife who shot him. The narrative seemed simple enough to run within the local tabloids, but the law needed more, and so did Charlize. Sources close to the situation pointed out that the future Oscar winner lived in a perilous state of doubt about what might happen next. A dead alcoholic father, and a mother who might be going to jail for killing him. The situation was difficult, but the consequences seemed even more dire. However, upon investigation, it was evident that her father was drunk, and her mother, Gerda, had justifiably acted in self-defense. Sources close to the situation at the time believed that she found solace in the verdict and happiness in the possibility of at least keeping one parent. Although the case had been carefully examined by the law and ruled self-defense, one thing remained unresolved. Critics, who had an inside track on the Theron family, believed that Charlize still held a grudge that she did not particularly understand. But she could only live in denial for so long. Moments passed, and time had once again done its job, chiseling away old memories and making them more bearable. Although the feeling did not disappear, it faded and molded into something different. What she used to think was a betrayal from her mother, with whom she believed she was a team, now appealed to her like survival and bravery. In her interview with Extra at Elle's 2018 Women of Hollywood, Charlize claimed that her mother taught her to be brave. "I am lucky enough that I had a great mom who really kind of made me brave and always told me to be brave," the actress claimed. But as the years passed and she grew older, she finally figured out a truth that had plagued her since that night. Whether she knew it or not at the time, for the first time, she said aloud that her mother had saved her life that night. But just after the dust settled and the world had taken a step back from the Therons, critics expected that she would at least be put through some form of therapy to get her back in the right mental space. However, Gerda Theron had a different plan. She immediately sent Charlize back to school. When Charlize looked back on that moment, she believed it wasn't the right thing to do. But no one can question the results, since it worked wonders for them. It would seem a mother knows what works best for her daughter after all. Consequently, certain rumors often festered about her mother and whatever her real intentions were. Some believe if she had nothing to hide and confused a 15-year-old in the process, she wouldn't send her away immediately. While she had been vindicated by law since the 1991 case, she was yet to completely win in the court of public opinion. Social media often rehashed the debate, with some considering her response extreme and others vindicating her actions. But just how deeply did Charlize's experience affect her career in Hollywood? Childhood pain and Hollywood. As expected, knowledge of Charlize's past has often prompted critics and fans alike to draw parallels between some of the roles she has played and her experiences in 1991. Over the years, many have imagined how a child who had seen such occurrences happen right in front of their eyes would succeed in a place like Hollywood, where sharks circle immediately when they sense blood in the water. But Charlize wasn't the type to give in to her fear. Instead of getting eaten up alive by her past, she stood up to it, especially taking movie roles that actually put her right in the eye of the storm, stirring up her memories. To most critics who flashed back on her movies, it seemed counterintuitive that a person who had been through one of the worst difficult experiences anyone could have had, especially at the young age of 15, would agree to take up roles as she did in The Burning Plane. The movie was a disturbing adaptation of a character who was suffering from an unknown trauma that led her down a path of self-destructive behavior, ranging from self-harm addiction. According to the 50-year-old, she had become fascinated by the psychology of an addict, hence her reasons to take on the role. Maybe not many people in the world would have had the courage to take up a role that might unwind a spool of dark secrets that had been kept hidden for that long. But Charlize was different. To her, it wasn't reopening an old wound. It was confronting her fears, her demons that haunted a past she wished had never happened. Charlize also believes that addiction is a kind of survival mechanism that we use as humans to cope and survive, which can be further boiled down to trying to avoid some of the ugly things that we don't necessarily want to look at, which is self-mutilation. While she enjoyed her role on The Burning Plain as the lead actress Sylvia, she actually gained critical acclaim when she dived into the action genre in 2003, playing Aileen Wuornos, the beautiful assassin in the biographical drama Monster. However, she did not stop there. She delved further into the genre with movies like Mad Max: Fury Road, where she played Furiosa, a character with controlled rage who is taking on a broken world with survival fueling her. Atomic Blonde, a Cold War spy who was emotionally detached and only focused on survival. And North Country, just to mention a few. But even though she did finally find success despite her scars in the past, critics continue to circle around the events of the night that changed her life, with questions about holes in her story. The 50-year-old had often said nothing about what had really triggered her father's reaction on that night. Why would he suddenly cross a line he hadn't before? Was the story made up to cover up for her mom? But Charlize, at 50 years old, decided to finally set the record straight and let everyone know her father's reasons for coming in guns blazing on his family. And her revelation was more disturbing than anyone imagined. Bombshell revelation at 50. Hollywood was back at its antics, and the usual sharks were circling. Charlize had stayed silent for a long time, but at 50 years old, she just didn't think there was anything more to lose. So, she let it all out. In an interview with the New York Times, giving more explicit details about the night, especially the trigger that set her father off. According to her, her father, who had been drinking at the time, was especially mad over an event that she could not control. For context, she was just returning from a movie theater with her mother, and they had stopped at her uncle's place, where they, unsurprisingly, found him drinking. She had said her hellos, but she needed to pee really badly, so she dashed out on them. To her, she had answered nature's call, but Charles did not see it that way, or at least the booze didn't. He believed she was being rude to him and his brother. To an alcoholic, he had no better way to put his child in order than to aim a gun at her. To most fans, her campaign against addiction began to make more sense. She had seen the worst of it. She had seen a father try to kill her for failing to hold her pee, and a mother who defended her by killing him. Who better to set up a campaign against addiction and its scarring effect than the 50-year-old? By 2008, she was named a United Nations Messenger of Peace, as she consistently set up her campaign against not only addiction, but also improving the lives of women and children around the world, and preventing violence against women and girls, as she experienced as a child. In the end, Charlize's story is more than a journey of pain. It is a dossier of a woman forged by pain, but who grew into a colossal force that stands against addiction and marches at the forefront of women's and girls' rights worldwide. Do you think Charlize's better option was to have remained silent rather than grant a tell-all interview? Is there a slight chance that the world will continue to debate her mother's behavior as extreme, even though she saved her life? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.